Good morning. Welcome to the latest installment of the Conference's Response and Recovery webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Vera Krekanjeva, Chief Strategy and Research Officer at the Allegheny Conference. I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors for their generous support and making programs like these possible: People's, Drawn Eagle, Highmark Health, and UPMC Health Plan. I would also like to thank the members of the Allegheny Conference's Regional Investor Council, who provide the time, talent, and resources to support our efforts. Today's webinar focuses on the role of consumer confidence in regional recovery. The pandemic created a significant shift in the economy and truly redefined how we as consumers, in the broadest definition of the word, engage in it. We are spending very differently now. We're changing our family plans. We worry more and hold off making bigger decisions. Understanding consumer perceptions and concerns is vital for predicting the direction and the speed of economic recovery. It gives all of us, be it businesses, economic development agencies, policymakers, or community organization, an indication of resiliency of our residents in both economic and broad well-being sense, so we can better calibrate our recovery efforts. Today, we'll hear from 3 local experts that actively engage in understanding consumer confidence, and we'll learn more about the evolving perceptions and sentiment of our region residents in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are featuring a guest moderator today, Mikhail Teshomi, VP and Senior Regional Officers for the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. He will set up this important topic with an introduction and some insights first, and then we'll launch into a panel discussion that features 2 local market research experts, Kate Murphy, President and Lead Strategist at Campus, and Kevin Strigley, President at Schmidt Market Research. Following the panel discussion, Mikhail will facilitate questions and answers with the webinar audience. At any time during the presentation, you can submit a question to our presenters using the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. And with that, and without further delay, please welcome Mikhail Teshomi.
Hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Vera, and thank you to the team at the conference for putting together this webinar on a very important subject. Consumers play a critical role in the economy. In the US, consumption spending accounts for about 2/3 of economic activity, or GDP. Given its large share of economic activity, the growth rate of household spending plays an important role in forecasting overall GDP growth. We can't talk about economic recovery without talking about household spending. There are a number of variables that influence how much consumers spend. Among those variables is how confident consumers feel. When consumers feel secure about their financial conditions and their financial prospects, they're more likely to spend and also to invest. And the reverse is true. When the number of economic stressors increases, consumers opt to save, they pull back on spending, and that hurts businesses. It could affect business decisions on investment and pricing even. So changes in consumer sentiment become very important around turning points in the economy, which the pandemic clearly created. When I look at consumer confidence, I like to look at its evolution over time. The link between consumer confidence and actual consumer spending can be spotty when you're looking at it just in one point in time. But when you look at it over a longer horizon, that relationship strengthens. Personally, I like to look at questions about intentions to make large purchases, such as cars, homes, appliances, that sort of thing, just as a way to get a sense of how spending patterns might change and then affect GDP growth down the road. In highly uncertain times, such as now, policymakers value information about consumer beliefs to inform their policy responses. At the Cleveland Fed, we've been maintaining a daily survey of consumers nationwide, and we asked them questions about their expectations of the likely impact of the pandemic to the economy and how that's influenced their own behavior. One of the takeaways we've gotten so far is that over time, a large majority of consumers have come to believe that the pandemic will last longer than a year. Households have come to expect that the road to recovery is going to be a long one, and in a way that's dampened some of their plans for spending. And that has implications for monetary policy, because that informs our policymakers that they need to calibrate policy and think about supporting the economy over a longer stretch of time, rather than just a moment in time. I'm excited to begin our conversation with two presentations of consumer confidence surveys conducted in our region during the pandemic. We'll start with Kate Murphy, president and lead strategist from Campos. She'll walk us through the findings of their survey, How Yin's Doing? Her survey focuses on the impact of the pandemic on the life of our residents. Then we'll hear from Kevin Srigley, president of Schmidt Market Research, who will share the firm's research on the evolving perceptions of our residents regarding the economy, finances, spending plans, and other metrics since the end of March. As Vera mentioned earlier, during the two presentations, feel free to submit questions at any point, and we'll start going through the questions after we've completed the two presentations. So Kate, I'm going to pass it off to you to kick us off. Tell us what you're hearing.
Wonderful, thanks, Mikkel. So as mentioned, our survey, which we've called How Yin's Doing, if you want to head to the next slide, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the methodology behind this. We've done two waves of this survey, the first in early April and the second in early May. Campos is a brand planning and customer experience firm based here in Pittsburgh. We also have offices in Chicago. And our philosophy is really that research is the foundation for strategy. So when we're working on customer experience and strategy projects, brand strategy projects, we really think that research has to be the basis of any changes that you make. So we have a panel of research respondents with thousands of people who have opted into participating in research with us. So these are the people we call on when we're doing focus groups or surveying folks in the Pittsburgh region. And it was natural for us to want to talk to them and hear how they're experiencing the pandemic and the shutdown. So in both ways, we surveyed more than 1,500 people. We got a great response, a low margin of error, and gave us a really good idea of how people are experiencing things and how things have been shifting. We're in the process right now of talking about what our next outreach to that panel at large will look like. And we've been doing a number of smaller surveys for individual clients. But if you want to click through the next slide, I'll just walk you through some of the key highlights of our findings. For one, we asked people how concerned they are about the coronavirus's impact on their household. And you'll see here in the second wave, 75% of people are at least somewhat concerned, and about a third are extremely or very concerned. So concern is very widespread. But if you click through to the next slide, you can see that concern is actually decreasing. So 41% of people in wave one said they were very concerned, and 34% of people in wave two said they were very concerned. So still widespread concern, but it's dropping. If you want to go to the next slide, we also asked people, here's a list of emotions. What are the top two that you're feeling at this moment? And in wave two, worry and restlessness were at the top. And restlessness was actually one that we added for the second wave of the study. So it's interesting to see that that really shot almost all the way up there. 31% of folks saying that they feel worry. I think very interestingly, hope and gratitude also towards the top there. So even in this moment, people are finding glimmers of hope and reasons to feel grateful. Again, comparing wave one to wave two. On this slide, the orange bubbles are wave one and the gray bubbles are wave 2, and then the bars show percent increase or decrease from wave 1 to wave 2. So you can see here that actually worry and fear have decreased since wave 1. So worry going from 45% to 31%, and fear going from 17% to 10%. So just as people are starting to feel less concerned, they're starting to feel less worry and less fear. Interestingly, anger and distrust are on the rise. So we've got distrust going up from 8% to 12%, or anger going up from 8% to 12%, and distrust from 9% to 13%. We also asked people to give us a confidence rating in a number of things. So everything from healthcare institutions to your chances of avoiding the coronavirus, your confidence in public transportation, the recovery. And you can see here that confidence in a number of critical infrastructure elements is rising. So the number of people who said that they are confident in healthcare institutions operating effectively to treat everyone, that rose by 13% from wave 1 to wave 2. Confidence in ability to acquire food safety, that rose 8% from wave 1 to wave 2. We're also seeing public transportation moving in the right direction, 3% increase in confidence there. Where we're seeing a decrease is around the idea of a speedy recovery. So 37% of people in wave 1 said that they thought the economy would recover this year from the effects of the coronavirus. That's down to 24%. 28% of people thought that the coronavirus pandemic would be effectively eliminated this year in wave 1. That went down to 10% in wave 2. We also asked people about their confidence and faith in different political leaders and institutions and their responses to the coronavirus epidemic. So you can see here that we've got everyone from President Trump to Governor Wolf, local officials, and almost across the board, effectiveness is decreasing. So for example, the effectiveness rating for Donald Trump went down 3% from wave 1 to wave 2. Effectiveness of academic institutions went down from 86% to 79%. For Governor Wolf, went down 72% to 64%. And most notably, effectiveness of public agencies like the CDC and the WHO went from 74% to 60%, so a 14% decrease there. We also asked a number of questions around work and employment to get a sense of what the pandemic has done to the local economy. And you can see here that a large number of people have had to stop work. So nearly a fifth of respondents have stopped working. 18% of them have temporarily or permanently lost their jobs. Another 2% have had to take paid leave for work. So those might be people, for example, who have had to take time off of work to care for their children with schools and daycares being closed. 35% of people are now working from home. And for those folks, we asked them about productivity. If you scroll to the next slide, you'll see here that 43% say that they are less or much less productive working from home. This stayed about the same from wave 1 to wave 2. So we didn't find that as people have been working from home longer, they've gotten more productive. It stayed about the same. So generally people feeling more productive in the office, less productive at home. We also compared the wave 1 and wave 2 results on work. And you can see here, again, orange bubbles are wave 1, gray bubbles are wave 2. There haven't been huge changes in the work situation from wave 1 to wave 2. So a lot of those seem to have stabilized. You don't have a big increase in people who have permanently lost their jobs or temporarily lost their jobs. Only 1% of people at the time of this survey had returned to work. This is a figure that we expect has changed now that Allegheny County is in the green phase. A bit of good news in the survey was around the restaurant business and that beginning to inch towards a rebound. So we asked folks about their use of takeout dining and delivery and buying from local restaurants. And you can see here that a higher share of Pittsburghers are saying that they're increasing those activities. So we've got takeout dining rising by 12%, delivery rising by 5%. There could be a number of reasons for this. When the first wave of the survey was issued, that was early on. People, perhaps weren't sick of cooking at home yet. So these were some interesting changes. This is another one that has likely changed since we've entered the green phase. Another question that we added for the second wave of the survey that we thought was quite interesting was we asked people if they've delayed major life milestones or canceled them due to the coronavirus. This sort of stemmed from us hearing anecdotally about a number of people, delaying weddings or not being able to start a new job. And the big finding here was that nearly half of people said that they have delayed or canceled some major milestone. So toward the top here, you can see starting a new job, changing a career, having a major surgery, or buying a home. Those were the top things that people said that they delayed due to the coronavirus. We also asked people if there were no government restrictions and people were able to decide for themselves about being in public, when would you most likely return to your normal day-to-day activities? And you can see here that most people are putting their confidence in the number of cases in the county decreasing significantly. So for one, right now we're seeing cases increasing in other places around the country. This sort of is our clue that people, as long as the number of cases are decreasing in Allegheny County, that is what people in Pittsburgh are most concerned about. And that's what they're using as their metric when they think about returning to day-to-day life. One thing that was interesting, we asked people in the survey if they or someone they know have been infected with coronavirus, and about 30% of people know someone. Those people who know someone who's had coronavirus or have had it themselves, they're more likely to think that things are moving too fast, that we should slow down the reopening. So that was an interesting finding on that point. We had a lot more things that we got into and interesting things that we can dig into in the Q&A, but those were our major highlights. So I will kick it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Kate. Great job, and a lot of similar information to what we've seen at Schmidt Market Research. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of the similarities to what the Campos folks developed as well. Next slide, please. So very briefly about Schmidt, we are a Pittsburgh-based market research firm based in the North Hills, about 35 team members, so a mid-sized firm. And as we think about small businesses, I think Kate can identify with this as well. Not only are we doing research on small businesses, but we are a mid-sized business ourselves. So we will talk about some of that as we move through the data. Next slide, please. So in March, we, in partnership with the Allegheny Conference, decided it would be valuable to do a tracking study. Vera and Bill Flanagan have been tremendous supporters of ours and really appreciate that, and have been tracking this over 5 and now 6. We're in our 6th wave since mid-March of reviewing this. Who are we asking? We're asking 5,000 people in the greater Pittsburgh region, about 80% of them in Allegheny County, the remainder coming in the 6 counties surrounding Allegheny County, and as you'll see on the next slide, made up of a pretty wide variety of folks that are generally representative of the greater Pittsburgh region, a variety of gender and demographic breaks, and similar to Kate's situation, we use these folks not only for recruiting for things like focus groups and one-on-one interviews, but also do quantitative studies like this one in the greater Pittsburgh region. Next slide, please. So we're going to move this through pretty quickly, but I want to spend some time on this. This shows the 5 waves that we conducted across a variety of variables, and you can see a couple things. So focusing on the top one is employment in the dark blue, and you can see it was relatively flat until wave 5 when we had a pretty precipitous drop. That happens to correspond with mid-May when it was reported that the unemployment in the United States was 14.7%, which was the highest that had ever been reported. So we believe that has a big part of the employment sentiment drop. And basically what we're asking here is, how are you feeling about the following factors? What is your general sentiment? And what this is the percent positive. So it would either be somewhat positive or very positive about these various attributes. When you go down a little bit, you can see the regional economy sentiment was relatively flat and then popped a bit in wave 4.5. We did wave 4.5 because we went yellow. And then as reality set in that yellow wasn't going to be the answer to all of our prayers, you can see that that sentiment dropped as well. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is the personal finances. You can see that that took a little bit of a bump when the stimulus checks came out in mid-April, but then personal finances has continued to drop as well. So what we're seeing overall on this slide in terms of percent positive is people, quite frankly, suffering from a lot of fatigue and a lot of sentiment in some of the verbatims that we get on the open-ended answers that people are really getting tired. So we will keep moving here if we could, please. Talk a little bit about small business. So, you know, much discussion about small business with the Paycheck Protection Plan and so on. People really are focused on their small businesses. You can see in the upper right, 77% are extremely or very concerned about permanent loss of small business within their community. And as you move to the left-hand side here, combined 86% of them doing everything they can, understanding that for some folks, finance are getting tighter over time. And when they think about small business in the community, a lot around restaurants and bars, personal services in terms of hair care and things of that like, and then obviously small business retail being the three ways people think mostly about small businesses in their community. So what are people doing? I'll group this into really three buckets. One of them is a lot of takeout ordering, and on a somewhat related note, buying gift cards and gift cards for restaurants and stores. And then the other one we heard a lot about was sharing on social media. So giving support on social media, if there are promotions or news or sharing that someone is now open, some of the ways people are talking about supporting their local establishments. So a little bit more about expectations in terms of what people expect when they're going out. And we'll talk more about this a little bit later. But sanitizers and wipes, everyone is expecting when they are shopping, carts and baskets disinfected, employees wearing masks, social distancing. So very high percentages of expectations. So when folks are going out, they're expecting the businesses to be performing at a very high level on the safety and sanitation level. And then, you know, one of the things that we've realized that are going to be really challenging is as we talk about concerts and baseball games and football games, how are people going to do that? And so one of the top ones was they do not expect full stadiums, seat spacing between the parties, sanitization, social distancing, and really limits on the number of people. So clearly consumers, when they recreate, are not expecting to have full venues. They're expecting, you know, half full, 50% in space for them to breathe to avoid possible contact with other attendees. Moving on to a bit around unemployment. So this was really relevant when we were moving from yellow to green as many businesses reopened their offices beyond just the essential businesses. And as you put programs together, clearly wearing masks, sanitizer available, extra cleaning of the office, and flexibility around people coming back. As an example, Schmidt Market Research, one of the things we've undertaken here is given people the option of when they come back. And thus far, we've actually seen about 1/3 of our people return to the office and about 2/3 still continuing to work at home. And we're going to be monitoring that over time. So as is said often, necessity is the mother of invention. You can see here the way people conducted business. In-person has moved from about 75% to about 38%. But a lot of folks conducting business online, you can see that moved from about half the businesses conducting business online to about 2/3, people getting very creative about how they're doing business. And we see a lot of these things carrying into the future: touchless payment, contact-free deliveries, telemedicine. We've seen a lot of our market research, for example, move online versus in person. And as we think about this, employees also have a series of expectations looking forward as well. So a lot more expectation around flexible work arrangements. Ours and many other companies have become experts out of necessity on Skype and Microsoft Teams and Zoom. A lot of changes to conferences and large events. And obviously business travel, we believe, will be under some significant scrutiny going forward. And on the consumer side, as I mentioned, less cash payments. Clearly, a lot of work in our company is around financial services. Huge trends that we believe will stick in terms of mobile and digital banking. At our local Giant Eagle, for example, a lot of curbside pickups have been a huge source of growth for them. I believe the local business trend will continue, and more focused travel, a lot more staycations, especially in the short term. And as we think about all the pressures folks are under, we believe that there's going to be a significant catch-up time here as people refill their wallets. We did see throughout the number of studies we did a lot of people with small luxuries like going out to eat. So we see that as some place that should see a nice recovery here shortly. But some of the larger trips and larger entertainment and travel investments we see being slower to recover over the next several months. And looking ahead, some of the questions we see that need to be asked for consumers: how can we make people feel comfortable? How can we make sure the venues are safe and clean? What kind of help do consumers need? And then how are travel plans being impacted? We've done some work with Visit Pittsburgh and with the airport. Those organizations working hard to understand how people's travel will be modified in the future. Will it be more local and regional versus national and international travel? Obviously, that has impact for the hospitality and travel businesses in an enormous way. And then from a business perspective on that, very quickly, what do employees need to feel safe and productive? What we've seen is clearly our employees are on a continuum from very frightened about this to less frightened, and meeting people where they are becomes very, very important. And then from a policy standpoint, what are the right levels of support for small business, using the PPP as an example of that, and what industries, understanding where consumers are, will need the most assistance as we move through this together. So I appreciate the time. Thank you. And I will pass it back to Mikhail.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Kevin, for those interesting findings. It's not easy polling the thousands of people that you all polled, so we appreciate that. I'll start off with a question for both of you. So what were the most surprising findings in your survey? What surprised you positively or negatively in your findings? And let's start with you, Kevin.
So there wasn't a lot surprising. I think what I've learned through this, and just anecdotally, is it amazes me how differently people feel about the pandemic. I mean, there are people that are scared to leave their homes, and they are very vocal about that. And there are people that can't wait to leave their homes. There are folks that couldn't wait to get back in the office, and there are folks that really want to continue to work from home indefinitely. So for me, the biggest surprise was the variance, the deviation that we saw across consumers and businesses about how people were feeling.
So that creates a bit of a tension, right? I mean, people want to get out, but then people are afraid to get out. So, what would you say that tells our policymakers about how they should proceed, or even businesses?
Well, I think for me, it's about meeting people where they are. I mean, it is about flexibility within frameworks, and really in business strategy development, thinking about how I can meet people where they are and recognizing that you've got a myriad of people moving at a different pace. So understanding that this probably won't be one big tipping point, but rather a series of tipping points that we'll see over the forthcoming months.
And that seems to line up with what you found with yellow not being as great as people thought it would be, right?
Yeah, and a lot of movement, whether it's the stimulus checks or moving to yellow and kind of the emotional bump that provided, but obviously then moving to green. And then in our personal experience here at Schmidt, seeing about a third of the people come back. So I think you've really got a gradual shift that is dependent on how people feel on an individual sentiment level.
Yeah, and that at least from my perspective, looking at it from the economy, it seems to suggest that it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride. It's uneven across different regions around the country and even across sectors.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the data, there are no real consistent trends. People are, there's been a lot lately. People have been talking about the impact of uncertainty, and Kate's research touched on that as well. Uncertainty creates fear, and there's a lot of uncertainty out there that is somewhat furthered by some of these state-by-state trends we're seeing in the news. And until we get some additional certainty, I think we're going to see a lot of the instability that you speak of, Mikhail, when you talk about the future.
Okay. Kate, what about you? What surprised you in your findings?
So we also noticed the variances that Kevin pointed to. One thing that I think was surprising was just how widespread the job loss was. That 18% of people have temporarily or permanently lost their jobs. That was higher than I was expecting. And we were careful with both surveys to make sure that the responses were representative of Allegheny County by race, by income, ethnicity, political party. And that question in particular, if you look at it by race, African Americans are much more likely to have temporarily or permanently lost their jobs. So 28% of African Americans have either permanently or temporarily lost their job. It was about 15% of people, of white people. So that was, I think, a very notable finding. There were some more positive surprises. People are really positive that there are others helping one another. 75% of people feel confident in that. Widespread confidence in healthcare officials, despite sort of what you see in the news, that there is still a lot of confidence there. That was another good surprise.
And then that speaks to, I guess, the disparities by race speaks to the importance of the diversity and inclusion efforts in our region. That's an important component of our economic recovery if we're going to bring everybody back out. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just to say that's completely true. We also had asked a question about if you or someone have had coronavirus, and African Americans were again slightly more likely to have it or know someone who has it, which is similar to national trends we've been seeing. So again, just speaks to the importance of maintaining that diversity lens in recovery.
Okay. Kate, I was surprised it was good to see that fear and worry had decreased, but I was a little troubled to see that anger increased. I think even empathy might have decreased a bit too. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means? Yeah,
so we did see both anger and distrust increasing. And to me, I think that's probably tied to the increase, the widespread feeling of restlessness that we're seeing. Wave 2 went out when people had been quarantined at home for more than a month. And I think that that sort of, I'm itching to get out feeling started to set in. But Similar to what Kevin had pointed to, it's really interesting how this differed by different groups of people. So for example, Democrats were feeling more worried in wave 2, whereas Republicans were feeling more angry. Women were feeling more worried than men. Women were feeling more confident in public health agencies than men. So therefore, they might not be as concerned about, getting out of the house. They're more deferring to what public health officials are telling them. We also saw some really interesting differences by generations. So we have, millennials feeling more restless than older generations. You have older folks feeling more hopeful, less restless. So again, it depends on who you're talking to for a lot of these different stats.
And do you see a difference between fear and risk avoidance? Is there a difference there?
That's a good question. It's tough to say without doing more research and sort of digging into that more with people to see what exactly, the fear and distrust is tied to. I think that when it comes to risk avoidance, I go back to the question about, when will you be more comfortable or most comfortable returning to day-to-day life? And people in Allegheny County are, tying that return to normalcy to a significant decrease in cases in the county. They're not saying it has to be no cases in the county or no cases in the state. It really is as our numbers continue to go down, and hopefully they do, that's when people will feel more and more comfortable going back to something resembling normal.
Yeah, and that tells me that the overall path of the economy depends on the virus.
Exactly.
And how it evolves.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. What opportunities do both of you see for community leaders and regional policymakers to help boost confidence? Kevin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start with two. I think on the consumer side, I think there is a huge opportunity in terms of community leaders, civic leaders, helping with confidence and certainty. And to the extent that they can provide information that creates confidence and certainty for people, in particular, based upon both of our research, related to the virus, how that's proceeding in our area, because we know people are traveling less, and they're going to travel less for the at least the short to midterm. So really getting some clarity and trying to give people something to hang on to. There's a sense in general, if you listen to both Kate's information and our information, and you watch the dynamics of the data, they're searching. And to the extent civic leaders can provide them with, again, certainty, I think that would be a big win. On the business side, there's been a silver lining in this related to people's sudden connection with small business. This is relatively new. If you think about it, it wasn't that long ago, once in a while you'd hear about Small Business Saturday. And now it seems like it's Small Business Sunday through Saturday, which is great. But I believe that, continuing to support that, because, one of the interesting facts is that small businesses make up about half of the private sector employment. And we've also seen the vulnerability of small business, the resiliency and the ability to hang on is much less for small business. So I think I would say just making sure that the programs and support continue for small businesses beyond the PPP and Main Street and some of the other programs in the long term, as we get past this and we move into the next phase, that there's small business support that is sustained.
Yeah, I would just build on that. I agree. We're seeing, as I showed in one of my slides, a increasing support for local restaurant businesses and continuing to support not just our local restaurants, but local businesses of all kinds is incredibly important to our region and to the recovery. And I think when it comes to, messaging to folks, it's really important to acknowledge their fear, acknowledge trepidation, and be very transparent about the guidelines that are being followed, how their safety is being prioritized, and that there is a clear sort of path that is being followed. We're in this together, and here are the things we're doing to not only protect our customers, but to protect our employees, and keep our economy moving.
Great. Kate, I was interested in that slide you had about the loss of productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is your sense that people are less productive because they're not around their colleagues anymore? Or is it the case that they have to juggle home life challenges? Or is it a lack of technology? What's your sense of it?
I think it's a combination of things. That you certainly have a number of people that are trying to work from home while also trying to, teach their fifth graders some school and make sure their, 3-year-old is taken care of and they don't have childcare, and, they're also trying to keep their full-time job. There's certainly a lot of that. For many companies, this was a very quick and abrupt adjustment to remote work that was not fully planned for or expected. So you've definitely got technological challenges and just workflow challenges. For some companies, this was easy. For many, it was not. So I think it's a combination of things. One thing that I was surprised by was that the needle didn't really move on that between waves 1 and wave 2. I sort of expected, okay, wave 1, it's a little more chaotic. It's a little more new. Of course, people are feeling less productive, but we didn't see that move too much with wave 2, which I think is really interesting and is something to keep an eye on, because we're hearing a lot about how this situation will change the future of work. Do we ever go back to a full-time in the office, work life at a lot of companies? Is remote work, or at least part-time work, going to be the situation moving forward? So I think that keeping an eye on productivity, not just in surveys, but really in touch with your employees, how they're experiencing this, especially once things, move a little bit closer to normal. Daycares are open back up. Does that allow you to work better from home? What tools do you need to work better from home? If this is something that's going to be not only for the foreseeable future during coronavirus, but this really forced us to do a work from home experiment that a lot of companies are going to continue into the future. We have to figure out with our employees how to make that actually work.
Yeah. Question for you, I guess for both of you. How do Pittsburghers influence each other to wear masks all the time, since the data show it's cheap? It's a cheap way to reduce viral spread. And are we doing enough to share this data, considering it's a major determiner of what it takes to get back to normal? Are Pittsburghers talking to each other and influencing each other?
We had 2 findings on that point that I thought were really interesting. One was that, people overall feel confident and positive about other Pittsburghers helping one another. However, 25% of Pittsburghers feel distrustful that others are adhering to the precautions. So, on the one hand, feeling hopeful that we're helping one another. On the other hand, a substantial number of people not so confident that other people are doing what they should do. So I certainly do think that seeing what other people are doing when it, whether it's at work or when you go to the grocery store, has an impact. And it's important from the perspective of your everyday Pittsburgher that you're seeing, I'm not the only one following the precautions. We're all in this together. Yeah,
and that suggests for people in leadership positions that they can lead by example too, and
exactly.
Too. Yeah,
exactly.
Important. Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that? How Pittsburghers are influencing each other?
I think in some ways everything starts at the top in a way. And I think the strong and consistent communication that both Kate and I have mentioned is very, very important. Governor Cuomo in New York got high marks, I think in many ways because he was there. And in the absence of information, people create their own stories. And he eliminated the need to create their own stories. So I think, one thing that I would suggest that is not only Pittsburghers influencing others, but, our leaders influencing Pittsburghers is strong and consistent communication over time. Because there is a lot of mixed information out there. You just use masks, for example. There is information out there that is for or against masks, so people are trying to distill all of this information. And if we can have leaders with strong and consistent guidance, I think that will be very helpful to influence all.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, I completely agree. And one thing that we've learned across our research is that, people need to hear these sorts of messages regularly. They need to be simple, they need to be clear, and they need to be action oriented. Simple, clear facts and hearing them on a regular basis really lowers confusion and will help people sort of know the directions to follow and act accordingly.
Just building on that point, there's a forward-looking component of that as well. We were talking before the webinar today about what's next. So people not only need guidance, but they also need hope. And so I think, leaders starting to talk about, right now this is where we are, but a new day will come, and that will be whatever phase that will be. But I think that forward-looking optimism is something that is also critically important for all of us. To create a bit more homogeneity in terms of how we're thinking about hopeful times ahead where we can all enjoy each other's company without mask barriers and other items of that sort.
Yeah, that hopeful messaging and the clear, concise reminders, that it reminds me of my parents. They live in Ethiopia, where I grew up, and every time I call them, there is a mandatory message I get automated saying, keep your distance, wash your hands, wear a mask, and the virus is being under control. So it speaks to all of that. So speaking a little bit about forward looking, a lot of the policies that we've seen and some of the survey findings were somewhat reactive to the pandemic. So is there like a way for policymakers to become more forward-looking besides the messaging? How can they be more proactive as we get to recovery phase and normalization?
Kate, would you like to go ahead, or would you?
Sure. I mean, one thing I would say on that point is people like to know what to expect. So even if it is, we're in the situation we're in right now, and this is what it looks like right now, giving people a clear idea of here's what the situation will be when we hit certain benchmarks. So people know what to expect moving forward. It gives a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, but it also gives people that sense of control. Okay, I'm in this situation now, but once we hit X, we're going to be able to return to doing Y. I think that's, once we were given the, red, yellow, green rubric, that helped people feel a lot more confident in like, okay, there is a plan here. I know what's going to happen, and I roughly know what benchmarks we need to hit in order for me to move on to this next phase. So I think more of that is the right way to go.
Yeah, the point you made about sense of control actually makes sense. In a way, the reactions of, earlier on with the hoarding of food, or even just the flouting of guidelines, seems to be a sign that consumers are trying to get a sense of control in their own way, whether it be stockpile on items or just say no to the guidelines. So I think that resonates.
Totally. And I think that also speak to, at that time, there wasn't incredibly clear messaging. So you had people, running out to get shelf stable food as if they wouldn't be able to leave their homes at all to go grocery shopping. So I think that, as it becomes clear, here's what we're asking of you. here is what we are doing, and here is what the plan is, people feel a lot better.
And I would just take, Kate did a great job covering the consumer side of things. On the business side, related to policy, I like the phrase, the business speaks to us, right? And in this case, what we're seeing in the industries in our region will speak to us. We have data that will tell us where the points of pain are, what industries, what businesses, what types of businesses, and really looking closely at the region, not just the national information, but the regional information, and putting together targeted policies that will support the uniqueness of the greater Pittsburgh region. It may be that our bars and restaurants are suffering more. It may be that some of the retail establishments here are suffering more. We may have unemployment trends that vary from the national trends, and really understanding those, tailoring policies that will meet the unique needs of the region. And then some of them will obviously not be unique, but really taking a look at the data that we're getting about the business climate and how it's evolving and how it's changing over time here in the region, and then developing policies that support the uniqueness of the Pittsburgh region.
Yeah. Did you, Kevin, do you have, outside of this survey, have you been looking at national consumer sentiment to see how that stacks up with Pittsburgh?
Yeah, we have looked at it somewhat, and we also measure the national economy from the Pittsburghers' perspective versus the regional. Interestingly enough, when we started, and this is somewhat responsive to your question, but I'll get to your direct question. What we saw originally was people were much more optimistic about the Pittsburgh economy than they were the national economy in town. And I think it probably had to do with we have been relatively fortunate in the level of COVID we've had versus obviously some of the early hotspots like Seattle and the later hotspots like New York, Florida, and others. But what we saw over time, and I talked about this in terms of a bit of compassion fatigue, I think what we saw over time is the regional sentiment converged and went down closer to national sentiment, because people said, you know what, this really is hitting us. And it's a widespread issue that's going to be a long-term point of pain. In answer to your question, I do follow some of the sentiment. One of the things that is really difficult, and there's a lot of people doing great work, Civic Science does some great work, and a lot of other people do too. It's a little bit hard to compare because the sources of data, who they're asking and what they're asking, the questions is quite different. So it's not very easy to say we're at 58% and they're at 72. Does that correlate? Because even, what Kate's research and our research, while both great research, is going to be asking slightly different angles on similar questions. So it's a little hard to compare it directly.
Yeah. Kevin, I wanted to ask you about the consumer behavior evolving, and you're saying your survey finds that people are going to focus their travel more and do more staycations. Do you have a sense of what a staycation means? Are we talking about Western PA or the next states around, or is it international? What does that mean?
The general feedback we're getting is the closer it is, the more comfortable they are. So they're quite comfortable going to their mom's house for a birthday party and getting more comfortable doing that. People are taking different approaches to social distancing and safety precautions on that. And then as you go further out, using international as the outermost ring of concentric rings, the level of comfort goes down quite quickly. So, largest drop in international travel, second largest drop to significant distances of domestic travel, and then regional travel, and then staycations in Pittsburgh. One of the things that is a real challenge is a lot of people, especially in Pittsburgh, identify staycations with Kennywood, the Steelers, the Pirates, and the Penguins as examples. And as we all know, unfortunately, all four of those have been restrained or closed for the recent past and somewhat foreseeable future. So that's a real point of pain in terms of what do we do from a staycation perspective. So that's that's a unique challenge that we're going to face as a community, is being such a strong sports town and not having our sports has put a real damper on things in town.
Yeah. All right, we have time for one more question, and this is for both of you. What's next? Where are you headed with these surveys? Kate, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So we're meeting internally about what our next pulse survey will be. Probably in the coming weeks, we're going to be going back out to our panel of research respondents. We got about 20,000 people on there. So we definitely want to keep on the pulse of what's going on with them. And we've been continuing over time to survey for clients in particular who are considering reopening or navigating reopening. So we're definitely going to keep on top of this. And we have a couple other interesting projects related to COVID coming up. So it's definitely going to continue to be a priority for us.
Great. Kevin, what's next?
So similarly, we're in wave 6 now of our survey. It's actually in field as we speak, and we were able to pull back some early data. And we're kind of trying very hard to understand what people are thinking and feeling as this evolves. So we did some research. Are they going out now that we're green? We've been green for a week and a half now in Allegheny County. Again, about 3/4 of folks went out last week. About 60% of people went out to eat, which was one of the things, as we heard, people were most excited to do as a simple luxury, and can't wait to have a beer with friends and have a bite to eat. So a lot of that, and then really just measuring over time, what is the long-term impact of this on the consumer and on business climate, related to work from home, related to business travel, related to spending, because similar to what Kate found, we found about 20% of people are out of work, either partially or fully. And so we're seeing similar numbers there. And what impact does that have on their ability to spend? So we'll be tracking some of those trends going forward as we maintain some level of a pulse on a monthly basis going forward.
Great. Well, thank you both for your tremendous effort that you've put on collecting all this information. Our community leaders, our policymakers, our businesses really need to hear this information so that they can plan and act accordingly. And this will inform our understanding of the recovery going forward. So thanks again to you all. I want to thank our audience for making the time to join us today. And I will pass it off to Vera to close us out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Great, thanks, Mikhail. And to wrap up, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation in today's webinar. We hope you find these programs helpful and informative. Big thank you to the Federal Reserve Bank's Mikhail Tishome for sharing his insight and moderating a great discussion with Kate Murphy from campus and Kevin Strigley from Schmidt Market Research. Thank to both of you as well for participating, and to all of you for continuing to be a great partner to the Allegheny Conference. Would also like to thank again to our sponsors, Peoples, Giant Eagle, Highmark Health, and UPMC Health Plan for their support, which allows us to offer this critical programming. Remember that the Allegheny Conference has a COVID Respond website, including the Ready Pittsburgh site that provides resources for business and workplace reopening. You can find a link to it in red at the top of the AlleghenyConference.org. Also, please note that we will be revisiting the topic of today's webinars on Sundays, Our Region's Business on WPXI at 11 a.m. Be on the lookout for invitation to upcoming installment of the Allegheny Conference Response and Recovery webinar series. And with that, thank you again and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks everyone.